Hello everybody, this is Catholic Dad, episode number 84. Socialists are audacious and pompous. Now, why do I say this? Well, I'm reading a book. It's called The Gulag Archipelago. I don't know if you've ever read it. I've read parts of it throughout my life, but now I think I'm dedicated to sit down and reading it. It's kind of a 3-volume, 1,200-page work about the life in the Gulag. The Gulag is a work camp in Eastern Europe. And it's written by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. I actually went to church with somebody when I was back in Syracuse who actually knew Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He's kind of a folklore hero. He's a modern-day prophet. And he really is probably one of the most prolific writers in the history of mankind. He wrote a lot of books, Cancer Ward, Day in the Life of Alexander Izinovichevich, August 1914, couple other books, but the Gulag Archipelago is kind of his summa. It's like his life work, and it's about a day in the life of the Gulag Archipelago and how the thing actually played out and transpired. Now, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, he was a courageous, heroic man. He was born in Russia, and when the Bolsheviks took over, he was a teacher, and he was an educator. And he was a good communist and a great atheist. Well, he came from a family that wasn't so, but he actually embraced communism. And he was a good Soviet warrior and a Soviet soldier. And he was on the German front in war against the Germans. One day, his colonel comes to him, and he essentially arrests him and sends him off to the Gulag. And he spends 8 years of his life in a cold, horrible hell in the Gulag, meditating and praying and converting himself about how to make the world a better place. And he writes a book about this experience. Now, here's the deal. Why are socialists pompous and audacious? It's because they actually think they can achieve their goals. Now, if you read this book, the Bolsheviks, it was the October Revolution of 1917. And then they actually started arresting people that were dissidents. Now, what did communism want? It wanted the complete seizure of private property. It wanted to make heaven on earth. And it wanted to take everybody's property and direct it in a centralized plan to make the perfect world. The problem is whenever you want to seize somebody's life work, you automatically make enemies and you make dissidents. So early on, and in addition, the communists were this. They were people that hated God, and they were atheists, and they believed that religion was the opioid of the masses. That's a quote from Lenin. But, well, anyway, so who's the enemy of communism? The enemy of communism, it's very apparent early on. Back in Soviet Russia, it was the military of the czars. They were the obvious enemy, and so therefore the communists knew who to round up and put bullets in. And so they started with the czar's military men. And then they picked all the priests off and the clergy. And the problem is when you start picking off good people, priests and clergy and the military men of the Tsar, amongst all those people there were good people, you make enemies of people that are on the fence about their faith in communism. And so people start to dissent. And so very slowly, over time, from 1917 on, that people started becoming enemies of the state, and they didn't even know they were becoming enemies of the state. And so, if you wrote a letter to your friend, Alexander Solzhenitsyn did, that I wonder why we're killing so many of my fellow comrades. And so he questioned it, and he became an enemy of the state, and he got sent to a Soviet prison where he got cancer. He almost died, but eventually he got out, and he became one of the greatest dissidents in the history of the world, perhaps the greatest dissident outside of Christ himself. And, well, anyway, so initially the priests were the enemy, and they killed all of them. But the people who all kind of cried at the disappearance of their priests were the leaders of the church, parish councils and the choirs, and then they came for them. And then it was the people within the parish communities themselves that watched their church leaders go. And then they kind of whispered amongst themselves about how they didn't like that happening. And then they came for them. And then once the comrades of the Tsarist army went away, then some good people that were loyal communists said, well, why'd they take him away? And then they came for them. And it was the wealthy landowners, and they came for them. And it was the intelligentsia, and they came for them. And they kept coming for people. And they came for people that were blatantly, they came for people in the open daylight. They came for them in the middle of the night. They came for them in secret ways. And they came for them with firearms and pistols when nobody had any meaningful way to resist. But the problem is this. If you think you have the perfect plan of communism, and you think you can exercise it in a righteous way, what happens when you object slightly to the authoritarian dictates of the state? That's what happened. There were good communists and there were good socialists that believe in the noble goal of communism. When I say noble, I mean the heavenly appeal of communism. People actually thought it was attainable and they thought they could do it. The problem is when people resist, then they come for them. And if you're a good person, that makes you an enemy of them. Yeah, it makes you an enemy of the state. And so then you quietly resist. And then what kind of good socialist could resist? Well, he wouldn't resist when their friends and their families and their communities and their fraternal organizations are being taken away silently in the night. I'll give an example now. There were 800 people in the 500 years of the Inquisition died in the Inquisition. 800 people. There were over 800 people per day that died in the middle of the night during the bright daylights in the Soviet death camps, year over year over year over year. Like the the Inquisition was 500 years. The Soviet reign of terror was probably 30 or 40 years of constant killing. They killed over 50 million people in Soviet Russia, over 65 million people in Mao's camps. And if you as a socialist, the Ocasio-Cortezes over there, or the Bernie Sanders, or whatever socialists in America, if you think you can make a system where you appease the people at the top without the resistance, then you're nuts. You're actually audacious and pompous. If you think you can perfect a system that by its very nature only leads to more dead people. The resistors that don't want people to seize their priests and kill them. They don't want them to seize their neighbors and kill them. Because socialism, communism, it seizes the private property and the efforts of people. And when you do that, you make enemies. And the resistance needs to be done away if you want to achieve your socialistic goals. And so you as a pompous socialist, you really think you won't be put in the death camp yourself if you actually oppose an unlawful killing or an unlawful, I'll give you an example. In Soviet Russia, you could rape any woman you wanted as long as she wasn't Russian. And it was legal to actually shoot her dead in the street. You as a good socialist, would you have opposed that or would you have cheered that on? You as a good socialist probably would have opposed it. And then they would have come for you. You cannot actually create a righteous socialist system. It's not possible, because there will always be necessary resistance against the abrogation of private property. And therefore there will always be resistors, and therefore there will always be death squads. And when you see the death squads coming, are you going to resist or are you going to join them? If you join them, you become the authoritarian dictator, which throws your soul and your integrity and your morality in the garbage. That's how socialism works. That's how communism works. And for all of you that thinks people should give up their right to bear arms, just read the Gulag Archipelago. You don't have to read the 1,200 pages. Read the first 35 pages, the first couple chapters about the arrests and how they played out and how quickly many, many, many people just disappeared in the dark of night. How whole towns disappeared, how millions of people in the Volga River Valley disappeared, how millions of people within every river valley of Soviet Russia disappeared, how they filled up the camps, and how the body count became unbearable, and yet there was only silent opposition, and how the people in America, the socialists and the communists within America, the latter-day Ocasio-Cortezes or the Bernie Sanders, were cheering on the Soviets of their day, how they thought they had reached the perfection of socialistic rule. The millions and millions of dead people and souls and martyrs, the abrogation of duty and the seizure of private property, How pompous and hubristic do you think you are? You think you can make a system that creates heaven on earth? You think you're capable of that? You don't have 1/10 the intelligence to do so. And beyond that, do you have the morality do you actually have the capacity to give up your moral virtue, your moral consciousness, when you watch your parents disappear, when you watch your brothers and sisters disappear, and you watch the work camps and the labor camps and the death camps fill? The body count is unbearable. Socialism has never worked in the history of the world. We're watching it play out right now in Venezuela. In 2012, the people gave up their firearms, and today they're being shot upon by their own government when they're trying to eat food that was gifted to them from foreign governments. How hubristic do you think you are? How great do you think your mind is? It's not that good. It's not that possible. You have two choices here. You have either liberty or you have oppression or autocratic dictate. You either have authoritarianism or you have freedom. How great do you think you are? Can you create an authoritarian regime that brings happiness and freedom to people? No, because nobody's ever done it, and the body count is massive. Please, socialists and communists out there, read the Gulag Archipelago. Read it tomorrow, read it today, read it whenever you can. But read the first 2 chapters, and if you can get through 1,200 pages, I will bet you $1,000 you will no longer be a socialist or communist by the end of it. This is Catholic Dad making you think about it. God bless you. Pray the Daily Rosary and get to Mass.